Alright, Hot Streak, moving on to Mage. 0 mana fire spell. Your next fire spell this turn costs 2 less. I probably should look at the fire spells to make sure I know what I'm talking about. Mage previously didn't have that many fire spells, but we got a couple of good ones in this set. Yeah, we got 3 new ones that we'll be looking at. There's also like Wildfire, Combustion, Fireball, Flame Strike, Grand Finale. Your next fire spell this turn costs 2 less. Could be really strong with Grand Finale. Turn 6 Grand Finale is a lot better than on turn 8. As far as the other stuff goes, I don't know that cheating out of Combustion is really that great. I guess cheating out of Flame Strike is pretty good. Worth noting that this is a fire spell itself, so you can't really stack them because the second Hot Streak will eat the discount from the first one. But seems like a potentially powerful effect. There was... The quest line does care about fire spells, right? But I guess the effect on this card doesn't really lend itself that well to the quest because you want to be playing 2 fire spells in the same turn. And the quest line isn't always going to want that, but sometimes it will be pretty good. Anyway, I don't know. Card seems fine. I don't really know what the home for it is, though. May or may not be worth it in the quest line deck. I don't think that, I don't think Spell Mage necessarily cares that much about this. Seems like it might end up being a little bit underwhelming, actually. Now, First Flame, this card is good. 1 mana fire spell. Deal 2 damage to a minion at a second flame to your hand. So this is basically like a twin spell card that 1 mana deals 2 damage to a minion. We know Ray of Frost was really good. I think this card is also really good. Yeah, just seems solid. It's really good for the quest line because it's 2 fire spells and you don't have to like play them back to back or anything. Good card. Seems like you play it in Spell Mage, maybe some other mage decks. Quest line for sure. And speaking of the quest line, this is Sorcerer's Gambit, so each stage of it wants you to play a Fire, Frost, and Arcane spell. And then your rewards are draw a spell, discover one, and then you get Dawngrasp, which is 5 mana 7/7 with Battlecry for the rest of the game. You have spell damage +3. So one of my early criticisms with this quest line was that Mage actually doesn't have that many cards that care about having the spell damage. But we did just see First Flame. That's pretty good to have the spell damage. Oh yeah, we're getting a new card, Ignite, that makes this card look a lot better. I was planning to just go through everything in order, but let's go ahead and skip to Ignite, I guess. 2 mana, deal 2 damage, shuffle an Ignite into your deck that deals 1 more damage. So this is 2 mana deal 2, you shuffle in a 2 mana deal 3, and then I assume that one shuffles into 2 mana deal 4. But the thing with this is you just never run out of cards, and every one of these is a burn spell. So like even on its own, that's a bit of a finisher, but that makes Varden look a lot better, right? Because one of the criticisms was running out of cards that care about spell damage, and then Ignite is just infinite copies of a card that cares about spell damage. So yeah, this looks a lot better now. One of the early criticisms of this also was not having enough fire spells to activate it. We get 3 or 4 really good fire spells in this set to support it. And I think we already had enough Frost and definitely Arcane spells. So yeah, this actually looks quite a bit better now than it did when I initially reviewed it. Yeah, I think Spell Mage probably builds into this card, builds into the quest line. And Ignite, yeah, Ignite is just a good card, right? Like 2 mana deal 2 is a little bit weak, but then everyone you draw after that is good. And it stops you from fatiguing, it's your finisher as well. Just a good card. Then we skipped over the Celestial Ink set. This is a weapon for Mage. 2 mana 0/2. After you spend 5 mana on spells, reduce the cost of a spell in your hand by 5. Lose 1 durability. So I guess if you're reducing the cost of a spell in your hand by 5, we probably care how many big spells Mage has access to. So there's like, the ones that cost 5 or more are Apexis Blast, Refreshing Spring Water, Flame Strike, Mask of Cthulhu, Deep Freeze, Grand Finale. And then I guess even discounting like a Ring Toss would be pretty good as well. I don't know. I'm not like super in love with any of those. What does the text on Arcane or on Apexis Blast say? It's if your deck has no minions, so you can actually play this weapon in Spell Mage. But I don't know how worth it that really is. In Spell Mage, you're gonna have, it's just a random spell in your hand by 5. So it's like very likely that you could hit, you know, your first flame or your second flame or something like that. I mean, it's obviously pretty easy to spend 5 mana on spells. But this is like purely a discount card. It's not like it draws a card. It's not like it draws a spell and then reduces its cost by 5. I don't know. It seems pretty underwhelming. I just don't think the payoff is quite good enough. But, I mean, if there's ever, like, one specific spell that you really want to be discounting, this is potentially pretty insane. Next up, we have Prestor's Pyromancer, 2 mana, 2/3 with Battlecry. Your next fire spell has spell damage +2. So we've seen a few new fire spells. This is really good with First Flame and Second Flame. It's good with Ignite. It's good with Fire Sail, which is the next card we're going to be looking at. It's really, really good with Combustion. The problem is, like, where do you play this? I guess if there's a non-spell mage that wants to play the quest line, then, like, this definitely looks pretty good. But I mean, that deck feels like an all, or like a no minion mage deck, so I don't know. Not really sure what the home for this card is. But it is potentially really strong with Ignite or First Flame. Worth noting, this is just your next fire spell. It doesn't have to be this turn. So this can even set up like a 7 damage Flame Strike on curve. But there is also the issue that, like, if your next fire spell is Wildfire or Grand Finale or even Hot Streak, then that's just a spell that doesn't do any damage that's going to eat up the spell damage +2. Yeah, this has really bad synergy with Hot Streak since they both care about you playing a fire spell. I don't know. The power level on this card is fine, but I don't know where you actually play it. But it is quite good with Fire Sail, which is 4 mana with tradable and deal 3 damage to all minions. This is just a good fire spell. Has tradable. Tradable's a good keyword. Hellfire is a reasonable card. Nice to not deal damage to yourself. I think you just play this in, like, most mage decks that aren't board-based. You for sure play it in the questline deck. You play it in Spell Mage, even if it's not a questline deck. Good card. Next up, we have Sanctum Chandler. 5 mana, 4/5 elemental. After you cast a fire spell, draw a card. So we've been talking a lot about the fire spells. There's a pretty good handful of them. Hot Streak is really good with this card. This is the first thing I've seen that makes me actually care about Hot Streak. First Flame and Second Flame are good with this card. It is an elemental that has synergy with Grand Finale, and Grand Finale is a fire spell. But, I don't know, Mage already has really good card draw with Spring Water and Arcane Intellect. And even the quest line helps you draw a little bit. I mean, the power level of this card is fine. I just don't really know, like, what is the deck you play this in? Are we just playing Fire Mage at some point? So you can play this card and you can play the 2/3 we looked at and then an upcoming card. I don't know. I think Mage just has better ways to draw cards. This is a bit expensive, doesn't go in Spell Mage. I don't really see what deck it does go in. But I mean, in theory, the power level of this card is fine. Clumsy Courier. 7 mana, 4/5 with Battlecry. Cast the highest cost spell from your hand. I mean, Mage, we just recently looked at all of their expensive spells, and they don't really have too many. The big payoff with this is probably Grand Finale. So for 7 mana, you get to cheat out your 8 mana spell. Doesn't really seem too impressive, but you do have a 4/5 strapped to it, which I guess is fine. Maybe it also like helps specifically with Grand Finale, helps smooth out an elemental curve or something. That way you can play all your elemental stuff on turn 6. But I don't know, just doesn't look that impressive. Maybe the best thing you're doing with this card is casting Flame Strike. It's just it's like Flame Strike plus Arcane Tyrant back in the day. I don't know, seems pretty situational. If your card is like Deep Freeze, then you can freeze your own minion. If your card is Apex's Blast, you can shoot your own minion. I just don't really see why I would be playing this card, and I don't see what deck I would be playing it in. And finally for Mage, we have Grand Magus Antonidas. 8 mana 6/6 with Battle Cry. If you've cast a fire spell on each of your last 3 turns, cast 3 fireballs at random enemies. So yeah, fire spells, we've been talking about those a lot. With First Flame really helps you cast 3 consecutively. Ignite, I guess, helps with it a little bit. But a lot of the fire spells are like pretty situational. Things like Fire Sail and Flame Strike. You don't necessarily want to be casting like just to keep up your fire spell chain. And it's like Hot Streak wants you to be playing 2 fire spells in the same turn. Although I guess in theory, maybe you can Hot Streak plus Antonidas on turn 8 as the activator for it. I guess that would be fine. But like even then the payoff on this card isn't insane. Cast 3 fireballs at random enemies. That's like really bad if you're playing against a token deck, right? You're probably just like killing 3 1/1s. The dream is obviously that your opponent has no minions in play and this just goes face for 24. But I don't really see how you set that up when this is an 8 mana card. I guess maybe you Hot Streak Fire Sail and then Antonidas. I'll do all that on turn 10. Deal 3 damage to their board and then 24 damage face potentially. But like how likely is a 3 damage AoE to even clear on turn 10? I don't know. I think this card's just pretty clunky. I think the payoff is not really worth it. And I also just don't really see a home for this card because it is a minion. Not a big fan. Alright, Paladin. We've got Blessed Goods. 1 mana, discover a secret, weapon, or divine shield minion. This is a holy spell, by the way. It's fine. We've seen the studies cards that are 1 mana, discover a thing, and those are like pretty good. But this doesn't give a discount on the thing that you pick up, so it's kind of just like purely a value generation thing. I think probably the most significant thing with this is the quest line. The quest line wants you to play 3 different 1-cost cards at each stage of it. Or I think the last stage is only 2 different 3-cost cards. Maybe I'm wrong about that. But, no, it's definitely 3 at all stages. But when you play this card, if you... So I'm assuming the way this works is that it always offers you 1 secret, 1 weapon, and 1 divine shield, and then you pick between those 3. So, since this is always offering a secret, it's always offering a 1-cost card, so that's really good with the quest line, right? And your other options are like weapon. Paladin has like 6 or 7 weapons, and they're all like pretty solid, so that's nice. And divine shield minions. I don't think there are many neutral divine shield minions, but Paladin does have a handful of divine shield minions. And they all tend to be pretty good. So it does seem like the Blessed Goods is offering you pretty good stuff most of the time. Not necessarily sure that it's going to be worth a deck slot, but it seems like it's quite good with the quest line. So if that takes off, then this seems like a good card. Prismatic Jewel Kit, we have seen this one, but 1 mana 0/3. After a friendly minion loses Divine Shield, give minions in your hand +1/+1, and then lose 1 durability. So since I first reviewed this card, we have seen a couple new cards with Divine Shield. We saw the first Blade of Wrynn, which seems pretty underwhelming. But there is a new legendary minion with Divine Shield that makes this look a little bit better. I still think that this card, it does compete with Paladin's other weapons because it's probably sitting around for a bit. I don't think you can really just jam it in like a Librim deck. I think it probably doesn't make too much sense in the questline deck. So I'm not sure that it'll find a home, but I mean, in theory, it's like pretty good payoff for the card, right? Giving your hand +3/+3 potentially is really strong. And then here's the quest line. Play 3 different 1-cost cards, you get a Light Justice. And then you play 3 different 1-cost cards to upgrade your hero power. Play 3 different 1-cost cards to get Lightborn Cariel. And she says for the rest of the game, your Silverhand recruits have +2/+2. So with an upgraded hero power, that means that the end result of this card is that your hero power makes 2 3/3s every turn. So very powerful. I don't think we got any new cards that make recruits, which would have been good for this, but we already have a couple cards in the core set that do that. And with Blessed Goods activating this more consistently, they're just cards like Penflinger, cards like First Day of School that activate this pretty consistently. I think the more I think about this card, the more I like it. So yeah, I mean, good questline. I don't think much has changed since I last reviewed it. Next we have City Tax, 2 mana with Tradable and Lifesteal. Deal 1 damage to all enemy minions. So just as a card, 2 mana, deal 1 to all enemy minions and Lifesteal. That's actually like pretty reasonable against Face Hunter with their Wolpertingers and other 1/1s. Pretty good against Token Hunter. Maybe even good against Questline Paladin or something. But I think the big thing with this is that Paladin is the equality class, right? So you have Equality, you have Librum of Justice, you have Barov. So yeah, it's just a good AoE for those. Wild Pyromancer, I believe, does not exist anymore in the core set. So this is like a replacement for that in those Paladin decks. Helps you heal a little bit, so that's pretty good. And if you currently don't have use for this weak board clear, then you just trade it away. So yeah, seems like a good card. Obviously, well, maybe not obvious, but I don't think you're playing this in the questline deck, but it probably makes sense in a Librum deck. Noble Mount, 2 mana, give a minion +1/+1 and Divine Shield. When it dies, summon a Warhorse, and I assume that the Warhorse is a 1/1 Divine Shield. Seems like a very solid buff. Hand of Adal is give something +2/+1. This is +1/+1, but also Divine Shield, so definitely a better buff immediately, depending on how you want to be trading at least. And instead of drawing a card, you get a 1/1 Divine Shield in play. That seems like a pretty reasonable trade-off. It just seems like a pretty good buff card. It gives Divine Shield, so it does have synergy with the Prismatic Jewel Kit. That could end up being pretty good depending on what deck it ends up seeing play. I don't know that this necessarily goes in the questline deck because you're going to have a lot of 1-drops. I don't know that buffing a 1-drop with this buff is going to be that good. It probably doesn't make too much sense in slower Paladin decks either because it's a little bit low impact. One of the things about Hand of Adal in those decks is that it starts drawing you toward your late game. This doesn't really do that. This also isn't a holy spell, which knocks out some of the synergies that could be available to it, but I don't know. Seems like a fine card. I think it might just end up not being good enough to see play, though. Alliance Bannerman, 3 mana 2/2, Battlecry, draw a minion, give minions in your hand +1/+1. So this card seems really, really solid. 3 mana 2/2 draw a card is like already kind of playable-ish, but giving your minions in your hand +1/+1 is really powerful. We do see a couple Paladin minions in this set that really want to be buffed. This is a convenient way to do that. Maybe this is good in the questline deck because your hand is going to have a bunch of little garbage 1-drop minions, and this can help make those better. Although there are like Blessed Goods, the Secrets. I don't know, maybe it's not that good in that deck, to be honest. Maybe that's like the big drawback of this card. Because Secrets are so good in Paladin right now, the decks themselves aren't super minion dense. But I guess you don't really need that many hand buffs out of this card for it to be good. I don't know, pretty solid. But I guess if you want to be drawing a minion on turn 3, you can just play the Secret Synergy card as well. I think this is a good card that actually might just end up not having a home. But I wouldn't be at all surprised if it ends up seeing play. Powerful effect. Catacomb Guard, 3 mana 1/4 with lifesteal. Battlecry, deal damage equal to this minion's attack to an enemy minion. So on its own, it just deals 1 damage and heals 1, kind of mediocre. But if you buff it with the Alliance Bannerman or with the Prismatic Jewel Kit or whatever, then like every +1 attack on this card looks pretty nice. But I think in general, cards that need to be buffed to be good are not good. And I think this card does need to be buffed, so not too excited by it. Lightbringer's Hammer, we've seen this one before, but 3 mana 3/2 with lifesteal, can't attack heroes. It's not really a great heal because you do have to be attacking into a minion. Not being able to go face is pretty bad for a weapon, and I think this competes pretty directly with like 4 other Paladin weapons that I think are pretty much all better than this. Fine card, but probably won't see play. Then we have First Blade of Wrynn, 4 mana 3/5 with Divine Shield. Battlecry, gain Rush if this has at least 4 attack. So this is something that you want to be hand buffing. It's quite good with the Alliance Bannerman, good with Prismatic Jewel Kit, good with either end of Prismatic Jewel Kit. But 4 mana 3/5 Divine Shield I think is a bit underwhelming, especially compare this to like Goody 2 Shields, which is cheaper and has a better stat line. I mean, if you're playing the Divine Shield deck, this is probably good in it. But I think Paladin has some better options that are probably going to be better than the Divine Shield deck. And even in that deck, if you don't hit the synergy, this card is really mediocre. And then finally, for Paladin, we have Highlord Fordragon. 6 mana 5/5 with Divine Shield. After a friendly minion loses Divine Shield, give a minion in your hand +5/+5. So similar to the Jewel Kit, you want your minion to lose Divine Shield to buff your hand. It makes sense that later in the game you're giving one thing a lot of buffs instead of buffing your whole hand because your hand might start to be a little bit empty at this point. This thing does have Divine Shield itself, so like generally, even if you don't have another Divine Shield minion, this card will activate itself, so maybe it could see play outside of a Divine Shield deck, just as a 6 mana 5/5 Divine Shield to buff something in your hand. I think that scenario might be more likely than a dedicated shield deck. Although I guess it's not like this card only activates once when a Divine Shield is lost. It does it anytime a Divine Shield is lost. So potentially you could buff something in your hand to have like +20/+20 if you have the right setup for it. And we do have the weapon from Wailing Caverns with Death Rattle, give all your stuff Divine Shield. Pretty good synergy with that card. If you happen to have a board, you can break that weapon on turn 5 or 6, play this, send everything in, buff something in your hand to be huge. Could be quite good. I don't know that Paladin really has like a great target to be buffing that huge. I guess you can always have Samuro. There is the Catacomb Guard that we looked at a few cards back, but there are definitely diminishing returns on buffing something more than once with this card. Because you give something +5/+5, they kind of have to Siphon Soul it. And then if you give it +10/+10, well, they kind of already wanted to Siphon Soul it. But yeah, buffing things in your hand is good when it's this much of a buff. I don't know how much faith I really have in the whole Divine Shield thing, but maybe you just play this with like 2 Goody 2 Shields, Murgur, McGurgle. Don't go too hard on the Divine Shields, but sometimes it all lines up, and it's pretty sick when it does line up. I don't know, I'm having a hard time evaluating this card. Too slow for the questline deck though, I would say. Although it's really good with Lothraxion in that deck. I don't know. This card is hard to evaluate. Could go in pretty much any Paladin deck, to be honest. Moving on to Priest, we have Call of the Grave. 1 mana, discover a Death Rattle minion. If you have enough mana to play it, trigger its Death Rattle. This is a shadow spell. Discovering a Death Rattle minion is like a pretty mediocre effect, because there are a lot of neutral garbage Death Rattle minions. But even if it's a garbage thing, you do potentially get some immediate value out of it, depending on how much mana you have. If you play this in the late game, you can potentially hit like Plagued Proto-Drake, which is really insane. Or, you know, Cairn or Dragonmaw Skystalker. I guess in the late game, this kind of like a lot of the reason those cards kind of suck is that you do have to actually spend mana on them, but with Call of the Grave, you don't really have to too much. You definitely have some stinkers, though. Some things like, you know, Educated Elekk, or even if you hit a Devouring Ectoplasm, it's not really that impressive with this card. Definitely seems like a bit of a high variance thing, but maybe you just really need the Shadow spell for Shadow Priest. I don't know. I don't love the card, but maybe it sees play because it's a Shadow spell. Next we have Seek Guidance, the Priest questline. So it wants you to play a 2/3/4 cost card, then you discover a card from your deck. Then you play a 5 and 6 cost card, discover a card from your deck, play a 7 and 8 cost card. You get Xyrella the Sanctified. She shuffles the Purified shard into your deck, which when played destroys the enemy hero. So basically you just want to curve out with this card, then you play Xyrella, maybe draw the Purified shard with Thrive in the Shadows, and just kill your opponent with a 10 mana spell. I liked this card when I first saw it. I still think I like it. I think it's not that hard for Priest to just curve out during the game, and then this is just an inevitable win condition for the class. There's like maybe a little bit of counterplay with Cult Neophyte, or maybe like Counterspell or something, but I think Priest doesn't really mind playing around those effects for a turn, and you just kill the opponent at the end of the quest line. The rewards along the way help you curve out. I don't think it's... I mean, I haven't actually evaluated how easy it is to curve out with Priest. I guess getting up into the higher end of things, it's maybe harder to find good cards. But on 8 mana, you can play like Varian. There's a new big taunt thing that gives armor. For 7 mana, you can have Soul Mirror and like Mutanus. I think it's not too hard to curve out with this card, and when you do curve out, it kills the opponent, which I think is something Priest wants. Then we have Shard of the Naaru, 1 mana with tradable and silence all enemy minions. It's also a holy spell for what it's worth. This card seems insane. People played Master Spell for a board silence. This is that for 3 less mana. Obviously, you do have to choose between the silence and the draw effect, but it was like pretty rare for Master Spell to actually be good for both effects. So you can play this for 1 mana instead of 4. If the opponent doesn't have a board to silence, you just draw a card instead. Seems really insane. I think most Priest decks play this card. Voidtouched Attendant. 1 mana, 1/3. Both heroes take 1 extra damage from all sources. So I guess the idea is that you play this in Shadow Priest with Benedictus that makes your hero power Shadow form. I mean, in theory, it deals damage to your opponent. But how often is this is that Priest deck dealing damage like multiple times in a turn? Probably not that often. And even if it is, like, when is this card good? When it does like 3 damage? How often are you really getting that effect? And then it's like still a risky card. You can't really play this on turn 1 against aggro because then you just freaking die. I don't know. I don't really like this card that much. I think it's just like a weird situational, can't play it on curve. I don't think even Shadow Priest needs this effect. Maybe I'm wrong. Priest Weapon, Shadowcloth Needle, 2 mana 0/3. After you cast a Shadow spell, deal 1 damage to all enemies, lose 1 durability. So in theory, this is 2 mana, deal 3 damage to all enemies. Pretty solid board clear effect, and you can stagger out the damage as you see fit throughout the turns. Priest does have like a pretty good number of Shadow spells. This is after you cast the Shadow spell, so this can maybe help clean up after a Hysteria, or after a Soul Mirror or something, or after a Devouring Plague. Pretty nice when your Palm Reading or Thrive in the Shadows happens to deal damage. We've got Raise Dead as well. So yeah, I mean, Priest definitely has the Shadow spells to make this good. Their board clears are actually like a little bit sketchy. They play Condemn, which is not a great card. I could see this card maybe seeing play, but it is a little bit of a weird card to use. May or may not end up being good enough. And even in Shadow Priest, yeah, this probably is the kind of card you would want in Shadow Priest. Seems like a good card. It does go face, by the way. A little bit of synergy with the 1-drop we just looked at, since this can go face 3 times. Twilight Deceptor, 2-mana 2/3 with Battlecry. If any hero took damage this turn, draw a shadow spell. Well, 2-mana 2/3 draw a card is pretty good. But I don't know how easy it is to, like, use this on turn 2. In theory, you could play Raise Dead, but, like, how likely is that to be good? It's if any hero took damage, so you can't just, like, play a 1-drop and then attack your opponent's face and draw a card. Like, that's a thing you could do, but you're Priest, so how often is that really happening? I don't know. I don't love this card that much. It gets better in the late game. I guess you can, like, Tour Guide and then Shadow Form with this on turn 2, but then you're doing that to the enemy's hero. I don't know. I think his card is just awkward. Psyfiend, 3-mana 3/4. After you cast a shadow spell, deal 2 damage to each hero. So I guess this is like your finisher in Shadow Form Priest. You cast shadow spells, deal damage to each hero. We do have an effect like this that's pretty good in Raza Priest, but I feel like Raza Priest is a very different kind of deck. This doesn't really seem to make that much sense with Benedictus. Seems like it's pretty easy to kill yourself since you're mostly giving up all your healing to play shadow spells. But I guess if Shadow Priest ends up being like a pretty aggressive deck, then this could be pretty reasonable. I don't know. I just don't really see it coming together. Void Shard, 4-mana shadow spell with lifesteal, deal 4 damage. So this is like the Shaman card Tidal Surge, which costs 3, but this can go face. And it is a shadow spell for Shadow Priest. I guess this is a little bit of healing to help offset your Psyfiend and Voidtouched Attendant. I guess I should have mentioned the Voidtouched Attendant with the Psyfiend, but like, this is 2 damage to each hero. That thing just makes it deal 3 damage to each hero. You're still just killing yourself. I don't know. But anyway, Void Shard. So it is like a little bit of healing that you can play in your Shadow Priest. Maybe that's the appeal of this card. It's also like extra damage you can play in your Shadow Priest, which I guess an 8-point life swing is pretty good if you're eventually trying to go for a Psyfiend lethal. But it does seem a little bit underwhelming. I don't know, all the Shadow Priest stuff just isn't that exciting. Other than Darkbishop Benedictus, of course. 5-mana 5/6 start of game. If the spells in your deck are all shadow spells, then enter Shadow Form. So there's like this whole push for Shadow Priest that like goes off and does damage to both heroes and tries to be like really aggressive. I don't know if that's really the direction you need to take. I think you can just play good stuff like Palm Reading and Insight and Shadow Word Death and Hysteria and Devouring Plague and Raise Dead. I think you can just play that stuff and you play like a sort of control or mid-range priest that has a Shadow Form hero power, and you're pretty happy to have the Shadow Form hero power. Although I will say this card looks a lot less impressive now that Hunter can do this, except their hero power costs 0 and they can do it multiple times per turn. Sort of makes Benedictus look a little bit sad. But I think it's a good card. Just not necessarily in the way that it's really being pushed in this expansion. And then finally the Elekk Mount. 7 mana, give a minion +4/+7 in taunt. When it dies, summon an Elekk. Really good buff card. It's pretty expensive, but maybe that's not too bad. It's a 7 mana card you can play with the quest line. I don't think this set really gave us like the kind of support that the Elekk Mount really wants. So this might just end up not really finding a home. But maybe it does go in the questline deck, as I said, as a 7 cost. I don't know if you want your 7 cost card to be that situational in that deck, but maybe it's fine. And maybe it just goes in like Control Priest, and if not, then you're still going to be generating it off Sethekk Veilweaver pretty often, so you'll still see this card. Solid card, may or may not find a home.